They didn't call me into a meeting. They didn't ask for context. They didn't even look me in the eye. They just erased me. On his very first day, the new CEO, Mitchell Granger, made a decision based on a spreadsheet and a shallow briefing. He labeled me legacy support and deemed me unnecessary. What he didn't realize, what no one in that C-suite seemed to grasp, was that I, Daniel Whitmore, 61 years old, was the only executive still holding legal authorization to sign off on the $180 million cross-border energy merger that kept Franklin Dominion Power alive. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't even wait for someone to explain. I simply walked out of the Dallas headquarters where I had worked for over 19 years and took a quiet job offer at Helios Edge, a rising competitor they'd written off as irrelevant. What happened after wasn't revenge. It wasn't sabotage. It was the slow, precise disintegration of a machine built on unacknowledged labor. My absence wasn't loud, but it echoed. Meetings became longer. Questions hung in the air, unanswered. Legal started double-checking documents they once approved blindly. On paper, the systems were stable. The deal looked alive. But anyone who's ever worked in real operations knows paperwork doesn't make a merger work people do. And one very specific person, me, was gone. Granger strutted through the halls in Austin-cut suits, tossing out corporate phrases like strategic renewal and cultural recalibration. But beneath the buzzwords, confusion had begun to ripple. Not panic, not yet, just hesitation. The kind that slips into boardroom corners and makes teams speak in circles. It was the little things. Delays in compliance, misinterpretations in translation, a missed jurisdictional clause from the German regulators that triggered an unexpected audit request. No one said my name out loud, not because I was forgotten, but because saying it meant admitting they'd made a mistake. The legal team in Berlin started returning contracts with vague objections, tone misalignment, compliance, uncertainty. Terms no one at Franklin Dominion knew how to respond to. The merger, once hailed in industry news as flawless execution, was now being referred to internally as fluid and under review. The truth. They didn't know what had gone wrong, only that something was missing. That missing piece was me. And still, I said nothing. I gave no interviews. I issued no clarifying statements. I let them write their polished press releases and throw around streamlining initiatives while my silence became its own force. You can replace a role, but not the knowledge embedded in its soul. The real story began at 9:06 a.m., exactly 1 week after Granger took over. I received no direct notice, just an indirect hint. An email with no greeting, no name, just a PDF attachment. 4 slides. Soft corporate colors, no signatures. Bullet points like streamlined leadership structure, elimination of legacy redundancies, reallocation of executive oversight. My name wasn't on it, but I was in every line. By 9:17, I was locked out of the internal portal. All my permissions revoked. My access badge still worked, but the systems I'd architected were inaccessible. The models I'd designed for global compliance stripped. It was like watching someone repaint a house without checking if the foundation still held. I didn't send a final message. I didn't pack a box. I took only a flash drive from my desk drawer, my personal version of the jurisdictional alignment model I'd spent 14 years refining. The same model Franklin Dominion now no longer had access to. And that's when it started. The unraveling wasn't a single event, it was a series of silences, of missed cues, of decisions made in boardrooms that no longer had the map. And every time someone asked who handled this, before the answer came back empty, they hadn't fired me. They had fired the only person who understood how it all held together, and they never even saw it coming. When I reached the glass conference room to ask a final question, the assistant director, a younger man named Cody, couldn't even meet my eyes. "They're in with Granger," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "It's not personal." I almost laughed. Of course it was personal. Just not for me. For them, it was about ego optics and control. The new leadership needed to make a statement, draw a line in the sand, and declare a new era. And what better way to do that than clearing out the so-called legacy team, regardless of what that legacy had actually built? Mitchell Granger, the newly appointed CEO, didn't shake my hand. Didn't ask for a rundown of my responsibilities. He didn't ask what systems I managed, what crises I had navigated, or what international partnerships I'd nurtured over nearly 2 decades. He made a single decision on day one: eliminate redundancy. I was on that list, grouped in with support analysts and communications liaisons, but I wasn't redundant. I was the infrastructure. I had authored the original integration protocol that allowed Franklin Dominion Systems to securely communicate with the German partner's regulatory backend. Not a project plan, not a memo. I wrote the actual framework. It wasn't in any org chart. It wasn't listed on HR documents. It existed deep in the operational logic of how our multinational workflow adapted across time zones, compliance layers, and industry regulations. Granger didn't ask. He just skimmed the executive summary someone else wrote and pulled the trigger. As I stepped off the elevator later that morning, I saw Jordan Allerton, my former supervisor. She looked tense, clutching a manila envelope. She didn't say much, just whispered, "I didn't agree with this," and handed me the envelope without making eye contact. I nodded once. I didn't need her defense. I didn't need the board's confusion. What I needed was clarity. And that came not from anything they said, but from what they didn't. No one stopped me. No one asked me to reconsider. Not a single person questioned the logic of removing the only executive with active clearance to communicate with the German Federal Trade Authority. That morning, I walked past Granger's office without knocking, past HR, past the lobby where the receptionists smiled like everything was fine, unaware I was no longer on payroll. I didn't take the framed awards or old notebooks. I didn't send a farewell email. I simply retrieved the flash drive I kept hidden in my desk, a personal backup of the compliance spec I developed and left. Not out of bitterness, not in protest. With precision. They hadn't fired me. They had released something far more dangerous me with nothing left to prove. I didn't go back. Instead, I moved forward. 3 weeks after my disappearance from the company directory, I received a short message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Rafael Raf Delgado. The last time we crossed paths, he had been representing ArcSpan Systems, pitching a merger deal opposite our team. His group lost, not because their ideas lacked merit, but because our delivery had polish and our integration model was more aligned with European regulatory frameworks. What stood out most wasn't the pitch. It was what he said afterward. He approached me, quietly, asked, "How'd you make the jurisdictional overlay feel human?" I never answered. But I remembered how carefully he'd asked. Now, his message was simple. "Heard what happened. If you're not tied up, I've got something you might want to see." I didn't respond. I just showed up. The address led me to a converted textile warehouse on the north side of Kansas City. No receptionist, no frosted glass, just exposed beams humming routers and the smell of fresh coffee. Raf didn't offer me a job. He offered me something better, freedom. "We're rebuilding everything," he said. "No borrowed code, no legacy junk, just clean architecture. Yours if you want it. No bureaucracy, no politics, no oversight committee. Just a whiteboard, a new team, and room to build something they could never dismantle again. And this time, I wouldn't just build a system. I'd build a future, on my own terms." How'd you make the jurisdictional overlay feel that human? That was the question Raf had asked me years ago after our companies had gone head-to-head for the same merger contract. I hadn't answered him, then just nodded and walked away. But I remembered the way he asked it. Genuine, curious, no agenda. The kind of question that lingers. Now, years later, his message was short. "Heard what happened. If you're not locked into anything yet, I've got something you might want to see." I didn't respond. I didn't ask for details. I just showed up. If this story struck a chord, if you've ever been the backbone they didn't bother to name, don't just scroll past. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because the next part of Daniel's journey isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about building something so right they can't ignore it. In the episodes ahead, we'll follow what happens when quiet expertise meets the chance to lead without limits. No more asking for a seat at the table. It's time to design your own. Hit that subscribe button and come see what happens when the underestimated finally take control of the blueprint. His new office wasn't a downtown suite with glass walls and catered lunches. It was a renovated warehouse on the east side of Kansas City, tucked between a coffee roaster and a reclaimed wood shop. No receptionist, no badges, no fake smiles, exposed ductwork, wide desks. Natural light pouring through dusty skylights, and something I hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity. There was no corporate hierarchy, no politics. Just a small group of people who actually cared about what they were building. It wasn't about market dominance, it was about doing things better, smarter, cleaner. The company was called Beacon Path, a mid-tier player in the data compliance sector focused on multinational workflow integrity. Small? Yes, but fast, sharp, and not afraid to rethink everything. Raf didn't offer me a title or a salary package. What he offered was freedom. We're rebuilding our integration layer from scratch, he told me. No carryover code, no legacy playbooks. If you want in, it's yours to lead. No C-suite micromanagers, no daily status decks, just a clean repo, an empty whiteboard, and a challenge. I didn't hesitate. I didn't negotiate. I simply said yes. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to my former employer. It was about agency taking back the steering wheel of my own expertise. They'd fired me without knowing what I'd built. They thought they'd deleted a role. But what they really did was release someone who no longer had to explain his value to people who couldn't see it. The following Monday, I started. No announcements, no onboarding slide decks, no welcome lunch, just work. Real meaningful work. I didn't bring a single document from my old job. Not a diagram, not a template, not a scrap of framework. I didn't need to. Because what I was building now had nothing to do with the fragile compromises of the past. I wasn't stitching together systems to appease a dozen siloed departments. I wasn't translating between marketing and legal or making risk digestible for executives. At Beacon Path, I was the language, and my only responsibility was clarity. The first thing I created was what I called the drift lock. Not software, but a process protocol. A mechanism that would detect and flag any shift in phrasing tone or data interpretation across jurisdictions. No more passive miscommunications, no more buried edits lost in email chains. Every change would be tracked, and every tracked change would trigger a review. It took 3 weeks to build it, 1 more to test, and not a single piece of it resembled the system I'd built before. That one was elegant but fragile, built for optimal conditions. This one, it was built for failure, for conflict, for the messy real-world chaos of modern compliance. Beacon Path didn't realize what they had at first. They saw the process improvements, faster approvals, fewer red lines, smoother audits. But what they hadn't realized yet was that I wasn't just fixing broken workflows. I was preparing them for a storm the others didn't even know was coming. Because I had seen what happened when companies ignored the architecture behind their power. And now, I was building a system designed not just to work, but to withstand. And this time, I wouldn't be erased. Beacon Path saw the early wins. Reduced red lines, faster feedback loops, quicker approvals from cross-border compliance offices. Everything moved smoother. On the surface, it looked like smart system design. And it was. But they hadn't yet realized what I was designing it for. I wasn't just cleaning up inefficiencies. I was building pressure resistance. Because I knew something most of them didn't. The $180 million zero-cents contract, the same merger my old company had called their crown jewel, hadn't actually closed. The signatures were in limbo and the regulatory calendar was running out. There were quiet delays buried in legal memos and off-record liaisons delays that hadn't hit the press but couldn't be ignored much longer. The German regulatory agency had requested additional clarification, particularly around jurisdictional data phrasing and ethical overlays. And no one inside Franklin Dominion could answer those questions anymore. Because the person who wrote the original compliance framework, the person who embedded nuance into the cultural logic of the deal was me. And they'd erased me From Kansas City, I watched the cracks widen. Franklin's communications team rolled out vague press releases about strategic agility and operational alignment. But agility without a foundation. That's just chaos with better branding. Meanwhile, Beacon Path, once dismissed as too small to compete, began pulling in the kinds of contracts we weren't even supposed to be eligible for. Pilot programs, short-term regional transitions, B2B framework evaluations. Each time I refined the system, I uncovered a blind spot I had once been forced to patch quietly at Franklin. But now, I didn't need permission. Every tweak was another step forward, another layer of trust we built into our reputation. Not just a compliance engine, an operating ethic. I wasn't copying the past. I was solving what the past had buried. Every clause harmonized. Every jurisdictional shift accounted for. Every data model clarified in advance, not after disaster. And with each successful rollout, I could feel it. This new machine wasn't just stable, it was humming. I didn't make announcements. I didn't call reporters. I didn't even whisper to old contacts. I just kept building until the day Franklin Dominion realized the rules had changed and the person who wrote them wasn't in the room anymore. The invitation arrived on a Thursday. The envelope was thick with a muted corporate crest, embossed on the flap, far too elegant for what it actually represented. A quiet surrender. The $180 million 0-cents merger deal had been reopened. Not to the public, not to investors, but behind closed doors via a polite email from the regulatory liaison in Munich requesting a re-evaluation of compliance confidence. Translation: someone had made a catastrophic error, and the Germans weren't buying the rewritten framework. I knew what clause had triggered it. I had embedded it myself years earlier. A cultural risk anchor nested so deeply in the legal infrastructure it had acted like a load-bearing wall. And someone thinking they were modernizing had deleted it. Not altered, erased. They didn't just remove nuance. They replaced legal fluency with formatting templates. And the Germans noticed. They always do. Beacon Path wasn't even on the radar during the original bidding process. We didn't exist in the top 3 at the time. But now, we were one of 3 teams invited to repitch. The underdog, the dark horse. The meeting would be held at a private federal review forum in Washington, D.C. neutral territory. No press, no boardrooms, just sealed folders, translation-certified documentation, and 30 minutes of uninterrupted time per company to explain why their system could be trusted. Raf came into my office holding the invite. "You ready?" he asked. I looked up from the whiteboard, where I just finished sketching a new clause interaction model that mapped intent alongside interpretation. "I've been ready," I said. "They're the ones playing catch-up now. And this time, I wouldn't just be part of the pitch. I'd be the reason we won it." When I walked into the review room in D.C., I didn't head to the front table. I chose a chair 2 rows back, just behind Raf and our lead counsel, Lindsay Cho. We'd spent 2 weeks prepping every angle of this presentation, but my name wasn't on the schedule. No name badge, no announcement, no title, just presence. Across the room, I saw her Jordan Allerton, my former supervisor from Franklin Dominion. She was seated next to Mitchell Granger, the new CEO who had cut me loose without so much as a question. When she spotted me, I saw it, an involuntary flicker in her eyes, a stutter in her expression. She leaned toward Granger and whispered something urgent but restrained. Granger glanced my way, his face unreadable. Then he turned back toward the front, pretending I was just another observer in the room. They went first. Granger stood tall, polished, rehearsed. His voice was smooth, projecting authority without warmth. He paced with confidence, clicking through slides loaded with graphs, timelines, and all the latest buzzwords. Streamlined oversight, automated parity review, re-centralized global authorization. It was shiny, but hollow. Midway through the pitch, a delegate from Munich raised a hand. "Can you clarify the source model for your jurisdictional inheritance schema?" Granger blinked. He turned slightly, eyes searching the legal team. Jordan glanced at her notes. A junior compliance officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. No one answered. Because the person who wrote that model, who had spent years encoding jurisdictional tolerance logic into a multi-layered framework, wasn't there anymore. Then it was our turn. Beacon Path didn't use slides. Raf stood calmly and spoke without theater. No jargon, no bravado, just clarity. When they asked about jurisdictional inheritance, we didn't explain it. We demonstrated it. We brought real documentation, live schema logic, and language-adaptive data samples. We showed them how tone affects regulatory meaning, how intent must be translated not just linguistically, but culturally. We walked through our clause harmonization engine, showing how ambiguity was reduced by design, not by compliance policy. The room didn't gasp, but it shifted. You could feel it when the German delegation stopped taking notes and simply listened. They didn't ask who wrote our model. They didn't need to. The structure told them everything. The way phrasing balanced risk thresholds, the way logic aligned between jurisdictions, it all pointed to someone who had been through this before. Someone who had made mistakes in the past and had learned exactly where every weakness could hide. That afternoon, I was pouring a cup of coffee in the downstairs lobby when I heard Granger's voice behind a column. He was on the phone. His tone was no longer polished. It was hushed, pressured. We need to reestablish contact with whoever handled the initial integration on our side. Yes, I know they were let go, but the Germans are asking about a continuity clause that, no, it wasn't flagged. Except it had been flagged. He just didn't know how to read it. And now the only person who did was sitting 10 feet away. No name tag, no introduction, no reason to help. They were expecting a slick presentation. I brought a battle-tested blueprint, and they never saw it coming. That night, the first email arrived. Subject line? Quick follow-up. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't subtle. Beneath the polite language and strategic vagueness, I could feel the urgency. Would you be open to consulting on legacy structures that have unexpectedly resurfaced? I didn't respond. 2 days later, a LinkedIn request came in from a senior advisor I barely remembered. Then a direct message from Jordan. No pressure, she wrote. Just wondering if you'd be open to a quick call off the record. I didn't open it, because it wasn't about closure. It was about them realizing too late that you can't delete the foundation and expect the roof to hold. And I wasn't in the business of rebuilding what they chose to destroy. The next message came in quietly, just a simple DM from Jordan Allerton. No pressure, it said. Just wondering if you'd be open to a quick call off the record. I didn't open it. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They weren't interested in reconnection or clarity. They were reaching because the building I used to hold up had begun to lean. And no one left inside remembered where the support beams were. Then came the third attempt, a voicemail from Mitchell Granger himself. The tone was all wrong, too casual, too late. Hey, Daniel. I know we didn't really get a chance to connect during the transition. Some integration matters have come up and they seem tied to your previous work. I think there might be an opportunity to collaborate again. I didn't play the rest. I just hit delete. This wasn't about resentment. It was about architecture. I hadn't been cut for underperformance. I'd been cut because I was invisible to decision makers who only understood what they could measure, not what held everything together beneath the surface. Now, they were tracing lines they'd erased, lines that didn't lead anywhere without me. I made the quiet decision to vanish completely. I set my LinkedIn profile to private, archived every message, shut down the inbox I'd used during the merger, and rerouted all traffic to a placeholder page that said nothing. Because when the foundation starts to crack and they finally look for the one who designed it, the most haunting answer they can find is none at all. At Beacon Path, no one asked where I came from. They only cared about where I could take them. And where we went was farther than anyone expected. Within 6 months, we landed 3 major international contracts clients that had previously passed us over, not because we weren't capable, but because they hadn't understood our process. Now the process spoke for itself. We didn't just pass compliance checks, we earned trust. Our proposals translated intention into infrastructure, and our onboarding was frictionless. I didn't seek the spotlight. I didn't submit to panel interviews or post-victory speeches. But behind every smooth launch, every timely approval, every legal audit that passed with 0 revision, my fingerprints were there, quiet, Exact. Necessary. Meanwhile, the company I left behind started surfacing in industry whispers. Fractured oversight, post-merger regression, leadership misalignment. They weren't catastrophic headlines. Not yet. But the cracks were showing. I never leaked anything. Never sabotaged a single file. Never spoke a word in public. They did it to themselves. Because you can't rebuild a structure if you don't understand its architecture. And that's what they had erased, not just me, but the unseen logic I had spent years designing into every system. That was the twist. They thought firing me was efficient. But they didn't fire me. They cut off access to the only person who could translate complexity into clarity. By the time they realized I had already built something stronger, cleaner, and far more adaptive somewhere they couldn't touch. Sometimes I still walk past the old Franklin Dominion building when I'm back in Dallas visiting friends. Not out of nostalgia, just to see the lights on. The silhouettes moving behind the glass. People typing into systems they no longer understand. There's no satisfaction in watching it dim, only distance. Because I didn't take them down. I just made sure they could see how far I'd risen without them. Growth wasn't revenge. It was my strategy. Not a weapon to punish, but a tool to carve out a space where I never had to ask permission to matter again. Daniel didn't storm out. He didn't raise his voice, call a lawyer, or draft a tell-all blog post. He left strategically, gracefully, and he let the cracks appear on their own. His absence did. What confrontation never could, it forced a powerful organization to face the quiet, structural truth they had overlooked. You can't cut the architect and expect the house to hold. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story about knowing your value so deeply that you never have to defend it to someone who never bothered to look. It's also a cautionary tale about leadership in today's world, especially the kind that confuses disruption with wisdom. True leaders don't start with a swinging axe. They begin by listening. They map the architecture before they touch the frame. Mitchell Granger's downfall wasn't that he was new. It was that he was arrogant. In his haste to modernize, he erased the only person who had built the pathway forward. And it wasn't personal until it was. Because what he removed wasn't just a name from payroll, it was the understanding that made the whole machine run. We've all seen this happen more often than we like to admit. Quiet experts get pushed aside. People with deep knowledge are ignored for the sake of image speed or noise. And then entire systems collapse under the weight of that blindness. So if you're reading this or listening and you've ever been made to feel invisible, here's the takeaway. Your worth isn't always visible to those in charge. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. Your power doesn't lie in shouting louder. It lies in what you carry with you when you walk away. It lies in your ability to rebuild somewhere smarter, somewhere quieter, somewhere that listens. Because you don't need to explode to make an impact. Sometimes the sharpest weapon in your arsenal is silence. Walking out without a scene. Walking out with your knowledge, your dignity, and your experience intact. That's not quitting. That's clarity. So how do you protect yourself in a world that often overlooks the quiet builder? Start here. 1. Document your invisible labor. All those systems you manage, processes you improve, relationships you maintain, write them down. Not for applause, but for protection. You need to know your value, even when no one else acknowledges it. 2. Build a private archive of your work. Don't rely on titles or public credit. Maintain a record of what you've created. Frameworks, models, procedures, things that showcase your thinking and problem solving. 3. Invest in relationships with people who listen. Seek out people not just with titles, but with vision. Surround yourself with collaborators who see what you bring, not just what you produce. 4. Protect your boundaries, emotionally and intellectually. Know when the silence in the room isn't respect, it's dismissal. And when that happens, have the courage to step away, because sometimes leaving is the most powerful statement you can make. Daniel didn't chase the press. He didn't post a resignation letter on LinkedIn. He walked into a quiet office in Kansas City, rolled up his sleeves, and built something that couldn't be erased. And 6 months later, the industry saw the difference. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been quietly replaced, quietly erased, or made to feel like your value only existed on a line in a budget, leave a comment below. Share your story. You're not alone. And if you believe in the quiet power of those who build behind the scenes, subscribe. Not just for more stories like this, but for a reminder that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to keep building even when they stop looking.